service animal is an animal that's usually a dog, and it's been individually trained to do work or perform tasks for an individual with a disability. This is the key differentiator, because an emotional support animal is any animal, and it provides emotional support that alleviates one or more symptoms or effects of a person's disability, but it's not trained to perform any specific work or task related to that disability. So this is the difference between a dog that's trained when someone's having an anxiety attack to go sit on their lap or to bring them their medication, versus a dog that just makes someone feel better by having a companion with them, or having someone, having the animal to pet, for example. That's the key difference between a service animal and emotional support animal. The other one is whether it's a dog or whether it's any animal. Psychiatric service dog, sometimes you hear this term. I prefer just saying service animal because it includes any type of disability, but psychiatric service dog is individually trained to help with mental health conditions. So depression, anxiety, PTSD, you name it. They are legitimate service animals, but I think sometimes there's some confusion that because emotional support animals usually help with emotional or mental health conditions, that they might not be legitimate service animals. But again, the distinction is that they've been trained to perform a specific task. And I'll also add that they don't need to be trained by a professional organization or a professional trainer. The owner themselves can train the service animal. They just actually have to have been properly trained. But again, it can be a do-it-yourself situation. Assistance animal, it's a term that you'll hear sometimes with the housing, the FHA, a term that encompasses both service animals and emotional support animals. I don't like using it because it's a little confusing. I prefer service animal and emotional support animal. And then finally, the most important person in all of this is the person with a disability. This is what the law calls them. You might want to say, a person who's experiencing disability. Typically, disabled person isn't used as often, but it's a person with a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. And quite a few people have disabilities that are invisible. Some are visible, some are only sometimes apparent. So I think that's very important to keep in mind, is that disability is a very broad term, and it's not always obvious whether someone has it, and you can't necessarily tell just by looking at somebody. Overview of federal law. Okay, so what I want you guys to take away from this, because we've already covered these laws when I did the introduction, but what I want you to take away is, if you see, you guys aren't landlords for housing tenants, right? You guys aren't airlines, but the American with Disabilities Act is the law you must comply with, which is what we're going to talk about. So when it comes to an emotional support animal, you're off the hook, although you can choose to accommodate them if you'd like, which we're going to talk about as well. And with a service animal, you have to comply with the ADA. And usually a dog, I'm going to say this over and over again, but it also can be a miniature horse, which I will explain the reasoning for that in a bit. And then state law. So the thing with states is they usually enact their own law that mirrors the federal law. Now, because of federal preemption, they cannot be less favorable to the person with the disability, but they can be more favorable. One of the big things you see is, except for 3 states, service animals in training are covered under the state disability laws, whereas under the federal law, it has to be an animal that's already completed their training. So they can be more permissive and give and make sure that the businesses are giving more accommodations, but not less. Only about half the states address emotional support animals, and that's generally always in regard to fair housing, to make sure that someone can have their emotional support animal with them if they legitimately need that animal. We don't have time to go into every specific state law, but I will say that again, the state laws mirror the federal laws. So there is no state law that I know of where an emotional support animal needs to be treated as a service animal. although I do recommend that everyone Google the definition of emotional support animal in their, or service animal and emotional support animal in their state. And we'll talk about how to do that before the presentation ends. So you have a little bit more leeway. It's just something to think about. But do remember, whatever policy you do choose, that it should be not arbitrary, right? You want it to be consistent. So if you say we're going to allow dogs, then you can't turn someone away with a dog unless you say we're going to allow dogs except these 6 breeds that are known to be considered to be dangerous. You just want to be consistent with what you do choose.